Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you very much for the nice introductions, and now something completely different. So, you see, we go maybe a little bit back in time. No, not really. So, my title is Lignins and Celluloses, Black and White in the Chemistry of Renewables. And the black and white is not just the color of lignin and cellulose. It also reflects a little bit what we have in terms of utilization. So cellulose is everywhere, basically. I show you a little bit of that in a bit. We produce about 400 million tons per year of pulp. That is a rather huge number, and we utilize that in really different ways. And while we do that pulping mainly from wood, mainly from eucalyptus wood, we generate 100 million tons of lignin. So this is the black stuff. It's really black, and what we do today with that 100 million tons, more than 98% is burnt. So that is basically completely different. I will start with this black sheep in the cellulose, or in the lignocellulose family. And we can ask ourselves, what is this lignin? And actually, we have a rather nice understanding of the lignin in wood. We know it's a phenol, it's a polymer, phenylpropanoid groups linked with different ethers, CC bonds. So that's pretty good known, mainly by works of Ralph, who looked into the native lignin. And lignin in the native state is yellowish, light brownish. And then we do pulping. And we do 170 degrees, 4 hours, 170 pH 14, so it's really hard. And then this lignin changes. This is the technical lignin now, where we have this 100 million tons. And now, all of a sudden, we only understand 25 to, let's say 25% of the structure. The rest is basically unknown, so we don't understand 75% of what we have there. And this, of course, can cause troubles in utilization. Now, I want to show you this statement by Alvin E. Harris. And he said, advances in the utilization of lignin are encouraging, but fall short of showing a way of using this vast amount of available material. Perhaps this problem will be solved when we have a better knowledge of the structure of lignin. So, if you talk to lignin chemists today, they will basically say, yes, that's true. The problem is this was published in 1940. Unfortunately, to some extent, it's still valid. The only difference is, at that time, it was 1.5 million tons of lignin generated. Now we have 100 million tons of lignin. But following this advice that we need to analyze lignin in a little better way, we are setting out and trying to improve the analysis for this technical lignins. So really for the technical lignins, make it a little bit faster. A lot of those techniques are from the 50s, from the 60s, so a lot of titration. So I'm not talking about high throughput. Just make it a little bit faster without compromising precision and accuracy. And we hope with that we can screen mills, and we can basically open new possibilities also for the utilization, and that's basically what we need. Now, looking at this analysis of lignin, as with many compounds, you can usually not just apply one method. So we need different methods. We puzzle it together. The only problem is we don't know how the puzzle looks like. So, and I don't want to bother you with all the analytics. I just will focus a little bit on the molar mass. This is basically this part up here. Now, those technical lignins, when you get them from a mill, they don't come as lignins. They come as black liquor. So you basically have all the process chemicals in there, all the inorganics. You have all the degradation products in here. And you're actually lucky because this slide doesn't smell. It looks nasty, and it has not a very pleasant smell. So all of our students know it. It's a a bit between rotten eggs and cabbage. So somewhere there. Now the problem is when you get all these black liquors, you don't have the lignin. And as an analytical chemist, you may understand that you can't inject that stuff on a GPC column. So the first step is you have to isolate this lignin, and this is quite time consuming. And I want to show you just one example where you don't have to do that. So we try basically to purify and analyze in a single stroke, working directly with the black liquor. And this we have done for the molar mass analysis of lignosulfonates, special type of technical lignin. Now, if you want to know the molar mass distribution, which is really an important factor, usually use size exclusion chromatography. We don't do that here. We separate that lignin in a channel. It's called AF4, or asymmetric flow, field flow fractionation, so very hard to pronounce all the time. So it's AF4 coupled to light scattering. In this AF4 channel, we basically inject the sample, and in the channel flow you have here, you basically align the molecules according to size by the help of a separating cross flow. So the small molecules diffuse in the middle, so where the flow is faster, so they elute first, and the big ones, they a little bit slower. And this separating cross flow exits basically through a membrane at the channel bottom. And we basically use that to separate out all the dirt, all the inorganics with that cross flow. So at the end, you have separated out all the non-wanted materials, and you end up with a molar mass distribution if you can analyze the sample with a light scattering detector. So this is this setup here. That's possible for lignosulfonates if you use a red laser. So that is basically the method of choice for our lignosulfonates. For craft lignins, where we have actually a lot, this is a little bit more problematic. First of all, they don't dissolve in water. And we also have a little bit problem with the smells detection. It doesn't work with the craft lignins. What we need is basically, or what we want, is an absolute mass determination. So absolute means not reference to any standard, which is not lignin. So this is a little bit puzzling, and especially for those craft lignins. Now, what is the absolute mass? First of all, it would be really nice to know the size of the molar mass of a lignin in a tree. Unfortunately, it's not just an academic question, but we can't measure it. Not because we can't measure it, but we cannot take it out without destroying it or changing it. So in principle, we would be able to measure it, but we can't separate it from cellulose and hemicellulose as one piece. So basically, we don't know how big the lignin is in a tree. And the ideas have changed a lot over time. Now, sometimes the answer is just around the corner. I had to review a master thesis. I have to say it's a biology student, and he wrote the answer here. Lignin has a high molar mass, 1,513 and 3 digits after the comma. He unfortunately took this sum formula a little bit too seriously. So, yeah, this is not fully true. But for the craft lignin, it's already out, and also there we need this absolute molar mass. Now, the nice methods Fritz just showed, mass spec, don't work. MALDI doesn't work. So lignin is really a nasty material. So we basically rely on this light scattering. And it's really important, if we want to utilize this lignin, that we know how big it is, that we know the molar mass distribution, in order to get into structure, property, elation relationships. Because we have this 100 million tons, and if we only utilize 10% of that, would be super nice. And here we found a way to get around some problems this craft lignin has. So this black color has also consequences in analysis. So it has a very strong fluorescence. It's a really no-go in light scattering. And it also has absorption, two things you really don't want. In order to get around that, we used a laser within an IR range, so 785 nanometers, which almost suppresses all the fluorescence. So with some extrapolation, we're good here. And then the absorption we can basically solve by a special setup in the laser itself. So now for the first time, we have real absolute masses for these technical lignins. And we can also see that they are really bigger than what has so far been published, about twice the size of what we usually get with these polystyrene standards. Now, unfortunately, this laser is very expensive. We just borrowed it for a while, and a lot of groups don't have it. They just sold a couple of them in the United States. There's just one in Europe at the moment. So we thought, why don't we correct commercially available standards with the data we have for lignin and assign basically a lignin molar mass to that commercially available standards, and then a lot of people can use that even without having the laser. So it's not that precise, but we get a much better interlab comparability, and it's a lot cheaper. So let's go to the bright side of lignocellulose. Let's talk a little bit about cellulose. There are just a couple of examples here where we come across celluloses every day. Toothpaste, toilet paper, tissues, napkins. In the last 20 years, we have applied our analytical methods we have developed over time to a lot of those materials, or to starting materials to make those materials. So I only want to bother you today with two examples, and I've chosen the wound dressings and the paper. Now, not just trees are able to synthesize a cellulose, also bacteria can do. And the nice part is they just make the cellulose. No lignin, no hemicellulose, pure cellulose, very fine fibrils, and those fibrils can hold up to 1,000 times its own weight in water. So that's why you have a gel. And for a long time, this is known in Japan and all over Asia, and basically you can eat that. And maybe the rectorate may want to try some of those celluloses synthesized by bacteria. It basically has no taste. There is some flavor added. It has 0 caloric value because we cannot digest cellulose. So don't eat too much. There is a buffet waiting outside. But this water holding capacity actually can be also used in wound bandages. So there is some wound dressings which are used for burned skins. I spare you the pictures. It holds really moisture. The problem is, if it starts to dry out, this bacteriocellulose really sticks to the wound. And everyone can imagine if it once sticks really to the wound, then change of bandage is really painful. So company asked us whether we could not change the surface of this bacteriocellulose in order to prevent that sticking. Now, to prevent a sticking, you make it more hydrophobic. The problem, or there's actually no problem to make a cellulose more hydrophobic. The problem here was that they said, yeah, the only thing you can use to modify that cellulose is what is already available or approved for wound bandages. And then your chemical toolbox all of a sudden narrows down to very few chemicals. The first thing we did was we used ethyl cyanoacrylate. You may know it as a liquid plaster. And you can basically spray it onto the surface, and with the presence of water in this bacteriocellulose, it starts basically to polymerize, and you get a nice surface which is really less sticky. And the other approach is that we infiltrated the bacteriocellulose with alginates. They are also already approved on the market as wound bandages. And then you can basically precipitate the alginate by adding calcium ions within the material. And that changes the drying out behavior, and the material is also easier to re-wet. And this went into pilot production for wound bandages. All right. Last example, paper. So there's a lot of paper around. We work a little bit with historic papers, and I would like to show you some examples how cellulose analysis can be used also for historic papers. Now, if we talk about historic papers, old papers, we have to talk about aging. And if you look at the life expectancy in Japan, they're at the moment 84 years. And if you compare that to Europe, we have 81 years. Same is true for paper. It's a little bit more extreme. So Japanese, or let's say Asian papers, have a rough life expectancy of 3,000 years, whereas our medieval paper, our rag paper, which is considered the good pre-industrial paper, lasts about 1,500 years. So why is that? And we worked together with a group from Korea and on Korean Hanji papers. So Hanji papers are considered the most durable in the world. It's a fantastic paper, and the way this is produced is a unique case where we can also study the rate, so the speed of natural aging. The Korean Hanji paper is made from paper mulberry. So they basically have a tree which provides a bast fiber at the outside. You see basically here. And what is interesting is that they have the recipe how they produced the paper 500-600 years ago, still available. So Myung-jung, a postdoc, was there and he prepared that paper. It's quite tedious. You throw a baseball stick on that paper for many hours. And then we had papers 500 years old, also Hanji papers. And now we had the possibility to have a starting point for aging, because that is the fresh paper. In Europe, we would make, in the medieval times, the paper out of old rags. And old rags, depending on in what quality they came into the paper mill, they have not a standard quality. It can be lower molar mass, it can be higher, so that is not, it's not possible to have a starting point for aging. In case of the Hanji paper, we had that. So we had basically the original, according to the historic recipe, 1.4 million almost. We had what we have today, and we knew the point of failure, at that point when the paper cannot be used anymore. And with that, we could basically model the aging, and this gave us for the first time years, so time scales, not just this paper lasts 2 times longer or 3 times longer, it gave us a real time scale. We could even calculate the number of chain incisions per day. And if we just do the math here, we end up with a lifetime for Hanji paper of 4,000 years. So that's really a durable paper. And then we can, of course, also adjust our aging, and we know how the artificial aging corresponds to real time. Right. Everyone knows old papers turn a little bit yellowish. They form chromophores. New paper do that, and old paper, of course, also do it. And of course, we were interested into the chromophores. So which structures are in there, and what do those structures tell us about the aging mechanism. The bad part here is that the chromophore concentration is really small. So it's around 1 ppb. So if you want to isolate that chromophores, you at least need 10 kilogram of pulp. If you talk to a pulp mill, it's no problem. If you talk to a library, it's a problem. So we definitely had to find more sensitive methods here. And we tried now really some mass spec here. What was good was that we had the structure of the key chromophores identified. So this was work done by Rosi. So we know what we were looking for. This really helps in this analysis. And we did DAISY and paper spray MS. In paper spray, what is shown here, you usually apply your analyte on a piece of paper, so the paper is usually just a support. In our case, the paper was the analyte, and we tried to get out what we could of those papers. For the chromophores, we see here an aging gradient in a book, and we basically could follow that aging gradient by paper spray MS and really nail down some structures in these aged papers. Still, the sensitivity was not, let's say, satisfactory. So we tried some more, and we did derivatization with Girard reagent T right before we did the paper spray. Thomas Eichinger called it derivatization on the fly. And with that, we got a lot more sensitive. So, usually libraries, museums really safeguard our cultural heritage. But from time to time, there are some also problems with that. Some disasters. Maybe you remember the National Museum of Brazil burned down last September. We had the collapse of the Cologne City Archive exactly 10 years ago. And 2004, we had the Anna Amalia Library burning in Weimar. 50,000 medieval books were completely lost. And some books were just damaged. And there were the so-called ash books. Unfortunately, many music autographs. With the ash books, you have the outside burned, but the inside partially intact. And we had the privilege to work a little bit with those materials. And we have chosen to understand the effect of fire. There's not much published on the effect of fire on historic books, because no one is doing that basically by purpose. Or so we have chosen what we call the identical book approach. So you take the same book you're investigating, you try to find that on the second-hand market. In that respect, we got a lot of help from the library itself. So they organized a duplicate, same version. So that means the same paper. And we had something to compare now. And we looked into all different effects of this fire. I just want to show you one. We measured basically the integrity of the cellulose, starting from the middle to the outside, so to the more heat-affected edges. And what was interesting is that the middle part was still in pretty okay condition. So compared to the fresh or the non-burned paper, the molar mass was not so bad. And then towards the edges, of course, at some point it totally drops. But the reason is that the thermal conductivity of paper is really, really bad. So you can have several hundred degrees at the outside, you could even still hold it in the inside. So that was basically what saved the middle part. And doing some molar mass analysis here, we saw that it looks strange towards the outside. And basically what we could prove is that cellulose molecules start to cross-link. So they cross-link because of the heat. And later on, we've also found that cross-linking as a mechanism for natural aging. Also, natural aging comes with a certain cross-linking. So that's not just a mechanism for heat, there it's extreme, but it's also a mechanism for normal kind of aging. At the moment, there's a a little project together with the Anna Amalia library, where we try to stabilize the edges by the application of nanofibrillated celluloses. All right, so I hope I could show you that lignocellulose chemistry is not just black and white. There's also lots of interesting parts in here. And the question is, quite often with such a professorship, what's next? So what's coming now? So here's a brief outlook. Basically what we will do next will be determined by the projects which are either new this year, which is the fiber modification, novel solvent stabilization. There are 2 EU projects. We will basically continue with the cellulose, with the lignin work in the Flipper 2 project. The idea here is really to support these lignin applications on a larger scale. If we really want to go bioeconomy, if we really want to make bioeconomy working, we need to utilize the carbon in that lignin. There's 30% carbon. There is a certain amount available. We can't eat lignin, so there's no problem basically with food. So that is really, I think, important. And then, of course, we have the Austrian Biorefinery Center, where we run really different projects, but there is extractives from bark with supercritical CO2, some analysis of papyri, and we also try to improve a little bit our analytical portfolio. And teaching, Erika already mentioned, I'm busy with the ABCM doctoral school, but it's a lot of fun. With that, I'm coming to the acknowledgement. And of course, in the very first place, I would really like to thank the students and the postdocs. I can't name all of them, so that's why they're coming here. But students and postdocs are those people who do the work, who come in with their own ideas, who have an enthusiasm, so I really appreciate that. I'm really thankful for that. The funding, of course, we have a lot of industry funding. It's also important, but the people behind are really the one who drive the daily research. I would like to thank my mentors. First of all, Paul Kosma. I really appreciate that you basically hosted us, that you introduced us to Boku. Also Leo März. Without him, we wouldn't be here actually. We would probably be in Graz. Also not so bad, but really appreciate that. And I would also like to thank Professor Gerhard Barnick. He introduced me into the world of historic papers. He keeps warning me of pitfalls, so I really appreciate that. And last but at all not least, I'd like to thank my family. Sebastian, unfortunately, is sick today, otherwise he would be here. And of course, Rosie, for his support on all levels. Where is he? Here. So, and of course, I thank you for your kind attention.